The Russia-Ukraine war is teetering on the knife edge of a third world war and worse. It could become a nuclear Armageddon that could destroy all life on the planet if there is the slightest miscalculation. We are living through very dangerous times, and therefore it is incumbent that saner counsels prevail and President Donald Trump is given a chance to try and organize a ceasefire in situ. It would be essential to recap the recent events and put them in perspective. As we are aware, somewhere in September, Zelensky had asked for permission to fire off the 300-kilometer range American ATACMS missiles and the British Storm Shadows and the Scalp missile of the French into mainland Russia proper, hit targets as far as Moscow and elsewhere. At that stage, it is noteworthy that President Joe Biden had refused this permission under the advice of the Pentagon, because the Pentagon felt that this would be a dangerously escalatory step which should not be taken. That was the sage counsel of the Pentagon. Yet, to our great surprise and horror, just 2 months down the line, we find that, President Joe Biden completely overturned his earlier decision. The elections took place. Democrats under Joe Biden lost the elections. They were routed, and Vice President Kamala Harris lost the bid for the presidency, and with a decisive manner. It was then therefore amazing that the permission that President Joe Biden had denied 2 months earlier when the elections hadn't taken place, he had suddenly now decided open season. Go ahead and fire off these missiles at Russia. And Zelensky didn't take more than a day to shoot off 6 ATACMS into Bryansk, and the very next day he fired off a dozen Storm Shadows and Scalps into Kursk region, fairly deep inside Russia, trying to exploit the maximum range of the ATACMS of 300 kilometers and about 250 to 260 kilometers of the Storm Shadows. It is also noteworthy that Lieutenant General Flynn, National Security Team member of Donald Trump's first administration, asked for the impeachment of President Joe Biden, that he was trying to foul up, that he was deliberately trying to sabotage President Donald Trump's quest for peace in Europe and the Middle East, that he was bent upon trying to trigger off a third world war, which Donald Trump would find it impossible to stop or to staunch or to tamp down. He would create such a situation, such a problematic situation for Donald Trump, that his entire plans for getting peace back and, finishing these two ridiculous wars in Europe and the Middle East, the plans would be totally wrecked. So, Lieutenant General Flynn had proposed that President Joe Biden be impeached for his very deliberate sabotaging of the plans of his successor. President Donald Trump had won his election on the promise that he would end these wars that he had done nothing to start, which had been entirely the brainchild of the Democrats, and not one war but 2 wars, and then they were even seemed eager to start a third with China. It was an amazing miscalculation of the highest order. And like I said, very sage counsel from, geostrategic thinkers like Professor Mearsheimer, Professor Henry Kissinger. They had all warned against such escalation and such an indiscriminate spread of conflicts all over the globe. In fact, let me remind you that Henry Kissinger had warned that it should be settled maxim of American policy never to take on more than one major Asian power at a time. So taking on Russia and China together, was extremely short-sighted. It was extremely dangerous gamble to start with, and it clearly highlighted the gap, the mismatch between American, concerns and America's capabilities, America's commitments and America's capabilities. There is the yawning gap in terms of the ammunition, especially the ammunition of medium artillery, that was falling woefully short because it could not concurrently support the wars in Ukraine and the war in the Middle East. Then there was the matter of the surface-to-air missiles, as also the anti-ballistic missile shields. They had been expending ammunition at a very dangerous rate against Iran, against the Houthis, against the Hezbollah, against the Hamas. And these stocks had been badly depleted. The American nuclear arsenal had to be modernized to keep pace with the Russian and Chinese advances, especially in hypersonic weapons. So, I think it was extremely short-sighted and very foolish of the American Democratic administration to engage or to encourage the spread of so many conflicts all over the globe. And this was dangerous imperial overreach and overstretch, and the strain was showing. So Donald Trump had won his campaign on the premise that he wanted to end these unnecessary wars, and wars of choice mostly, right? Because the Russia-Ukraine wars was a proxy war of choice for the United States. They had poked Russia in the eye till Russia attacked and created this crisis. They had ignored Russian, plaintive cries, please don't spread the NATO, the expansion of NATO was dangerous, and yet they went over 14 countries, they brought into the ambit of NATO, ignored Russian warnings, and their last red lines were Georgia and Ukraine, and they violated those with impunity, trying to push Russia into a conflict. Today they have that conflict, and now a stage has been reached where this conflict could escalate into a global third world war, into a nuclear Armageddon. Extremely dangerous, extremely short-sighted, and very, very foolish indeed. So what has been the Russian response? The Russian response has been very methodical and very coldly rational. President Putin first announced, in response to this threat of unleashing of the ATACMS and Storm Shadows into his territory, that he would treat it as America and NATO waging war directly against Russia. His thesis was very simple. The ATACMS, the Storm Shadows, cannot be fired without the satellite coordinates, without filling in those satellite coordinates into the missile guidance system, and selecting target and attacking those targets is entirely done by American citizens, whether in uniform or civilian contractors, but ATACMS cannot be fired by the Ukrainians because simply they don't have the codes for queuing in the ATACMS and the Storm Shadows. This has to be done by either American or British or French nationals. And therefore, that implies, as per President Putin, that America was directly at war with Russia, and this would have consequences. He now finally reacted on 21st of November this year when he fired off the Oreshnik missile, hypersonic intermediate range ballistic missile with a range of 6,000 kilometer, max range of 6,000 kilometer, which can fly at 11 to 13 times the speed of sound, Mach 10, Mach 11, Mach almost 13. And therefore, this is a missile system that is unstoppable because of its sheer speed. And what adds complexity to intercepting these kind of missiles is the fact that they have 6 warheads. Each of these has 6 submunitions. That means a total of 36 submunitions of 100 kilogram each of explosive can hit the designated target. Now, this one was directed at the Dnipro factory, the old Soviet missile producing factory plant, massive plant that was in Dnipro. This was hit by the MIRVed warheads and devastated. The impact was devastating, and you could see the panic in Ukraine and also the great nervousness in the European capitals. And the next day, that very night, in fact, Putin announced that we have used the Oreshnik intermediate range ballistic missile, which is hypersonic, which has got 36 submunitions, which is therefore totally unstoppable by any American or NATO anti-ballistic missile system. It just cannot be intercepted. And wherever it is fired, it will get through. It got through in Dnipro and devastated that factory. Not only does it have the explosive warhead, even the empty warheads hit with 460 joules of energy because of the very high speed, Mach 10, Mach 11, Mach 13 almost. I mean, the speed itself is the one that causes massive damage and destruction on the target, the kinetic energy of such a strike. And this strike, with this strike, normally it would take almost 100 of such conventional tipped missiles to destroy an American or a British or a French air base. With this one, he can do it with maximum 3 to 4 such missiles. In fact, they are saying that a concentrated target can be taken out by just one such or a Oreshnik class missile, hypersonic IRBM, and the whole of Europe is in range, even Alaska is in range. So, this is a very new kind of a factor introduced into the equation in the Russia-Ukraine war in Europe. And this is a very, just short of the nuclear use of nuclear weapons, this is a serious escalation, qualitative escalation. And there was timorousness all over Europe and the United States. But then we found a recklessness bordering on insanity. The Americans and the Europeans decided, so what? So what if it results into a nuclear war? If it escalates into a nuclear Armageddon, or at the very least a third world war at the conventional level? Joe Biden seemed to be sharing he doesn't care. Even if it escalates to a nuclear level, even if millions of American citizens die. The simple fact is Russia has 5,800 nuclear warheads and the Sarmat intercontinental ballistic missiles that can reach anywhere on the globe and anywhere on the United States, and each one of them can take out an entire city, impose 175 to 200,000 casualties. I mean, that is the ultimate nightmare. It would mark the extinction of all life on the planet if such a nuclear exchange were to take place. And yet we found a strange, a bizarre recklessness. Let's push the envelope till he fires a nuclear weapon. Is that rational? I think it is insane. It is absolutely insane to push your luck so far. Now, there was panic even in the United States, as they were now, the American intelligence had given inputs that the Russians would now hit Kyiv. They would hit the American and the NATO embassies in Kyiv of the NATO countries, and they started withdrawing their embassy personnel and staff from Kyiv. That just shows the level of panic. even though they may be showing a lot of sang-froid and we don't care if our population gets nuked. But the simple fact is that they have started withdrawing from the American and the British and other embassies their staff, because they are quite concerned that Russia might now hit Kyiv and possibly even other targets in Europe, starting with the anti-ballistic missile base that the Americans have set up in Poland. That is one of the most likely targets. And Putin warned that, look, I am not concerned, I do not want to cause collateral damage to civilian population, and therefore we will warn the populations of the areas we are going to strike with the Oreshniks well in advance. And I understand that the Russians have dropped pamphlets over Kyiv, warning the citizens to leave that city because it is next on the target, and they said it is going to be possibly hit on the 30th of this month. So what happens? How will the Americans respond? Will Russia in the next move confine itself to Ukraine, or will it spread the targets horizontally, horizontal escalation all over Europe? The vertical escalation has already been done to the level of Oreshnik missiles, but will it now also spread the targets horizontally to cover European cities, to cover British air bases? Because they are very incensed that the British have been the most aggressive and the most theatrical in trying to push for war with Russia. How serious the matter is shown by the fact that Admiral Bayer, the chairman of the NATO military committee, has warned Europe to be prepared for war. He has said our commercial companies must now prepare for full-scale war, Third World War in Europe. Look, World War I started in Europe, World War II started in Europe, and now it is getting increasingly likely that a full-scale, full-blooded Third World War will also start in Europe. Europe, the continent that keeps preaching rationality to the rest of the world. They are acting in a most emotive, in a most insane, dangerous and reckless manner, which could easily cause accidental escalation. Accidental escalation, the chances of that are becoming increasingly greater by the hour. Not even by the day, but by the hour. And with these, Oreshnik missiles, hypersonic intermediate range ballistic missiles, there is a qualitative, a vertical escalation in the level of weapon usage. And if this turns again into a horizontal escalation in which the Russians preemptorily strike or try and preempt NATO attacks by hitting their airfields and major military installations, command and control nodes, then we have the full-scale prescription for a full-blown Third World War that could escalate into a nuclear exchange and destroy all life on this planet. I think that would be the height of insanity, and we are hopeful that President-elect Donald Trump will be able to prevent the deep state from going into these reckless bouts of madness and insanity and trying to push the world into a Third World War just so that Donald Trump cannot, get the credit for being able to stop these conflicts. They want to make these conflicts unstoppable, at least in Europe. In the Middle East, as we have seen, there is a ceasefire which has been put into place between Hezbollah and Israel. But we are not very sure even that how that will pan out, how long that ceasefire would last, number one. And number two, we find that the attempt has been to have a ceasefire on the Lebanon border, but intensify the conflict in Syria and in Iraq, through which the Israelis allege that the Iranians are sending their missiles and weapon systems with which to target Israel. They are not targeting, directly against Israel. They are doing it through their proxies, and the pipeline for the supply of these dangerous missiles and other weapon systems is via Syria and Iraq. And hence, they have started a major escalation in Iraq by their Islamic proxies, their ISIS, Jihadi, Al-Qaeda proxies. Amazing, amazing. Till a few years back, they were fighting the ISIS, they were fighting the Al-Qaeda. Now they are using the Al-Qaeda to try and depose Bashar al-Assad in Syria. They have started major attacks in the city of Aleppo, which is a very important center of the Syrian civilization, and possibly it is the route that the Israelis wish to now obliterate, the routes of supply that come from Iran via Syria into Lebanon and perhaps Gaza. Thank you.